This is Noreen Crone-Findlay with my third video tutorial on Lucet cord making techniques. One of the things that I love to use Lucet cords for is to make button closures. They make the most elegant and funky and wonderful and magical button closures. So that's what this small tutorial is all about. First of all, let's just do the whole links thing. Crone-Findlay.com currently is just because I got hacked and the nasty folks did horrible things, and so my web server had to completely erase my website. So now it's just at this point a place where I have my links to my blog, which is tottytalkscrafts.com, YouTube video tutorials, which of course that's where we are right here, and my Etsy shop. And yes, I will be selling my little Lucets in my Etsy shop. And you can follow me on Facebook at Noreen Crone-Findlay Designs. So, let's get started with button closures. I have an old leather coat that I just love. What I didn't love were the buttons. I found them really boring. So what I did was I took some arbutus twigs from when my sister-in-law trimmed her arbutus tree, and I cut them to length. I drilled holes, I sanded and shaped them, and then I varnished them. Then I made about a 3.5 inch to 4 inch length cord on my Lucet. This one is really long, but we'll pretend it isn't. And I used a crochet hook and I pulled the end of the Lucet cord through one hole, reached through from the other side, pulled the end through the other one, pulled them down, and then I tied the ends together here. Then I held it up against where I wanted the button to be, and on the back I used a plastic button. I stitched through the plastic button to the front and stitched through the knotted ends of my Lucet cord. And then when I was done, I put the ends from the Lucet cord into a craft needle, and I wove the ends in so that they disappeared. And voila! Awesome buttons that are just so much more fun than the plain, dull, yucky old buttons that were on the coat originally. And the buttons just go through the regular buttonhole, just like that. Works great. I'm going to show you some other button closures to make with your Lucet. I'll be right back. I'm just going to put the coat away. Okay, so here is the way I did the button on the leather jacket, using the regular buttonhole that's already on the garment. I put the Lucet cord through the two holes of the button. It can be a twig button or a flat button like this one, and tied my ends together, stitched them together, and then I used a button. The glare off the windows is pretty strong. I used a button on the back so that I was stitching through the button, because when you're using hand woven or hand knitted or crocheted fabric, you have to have something to stabilize your button on the back of your garment. And so you use something that's kind of fun and funky or elegant and plain and simple on the back. Now I'm going to show you how to use your Lucet cord as a button loop. We're going to sew our button on this side of the garment, and again using a button on the back to support and stabilize it. Okay, I'm going to tie a knot, and I'm going to take my thread through the backing button and go back down through it. I'm going to go through the strands of the, go through the strands of the button so that right by the knot, so the button is now secured onto my needle and thread. I hold it to the back and drop it, go through, up and down from the front, and through, and I keep going through the holes of the button. You can also use a shank button on the back, stitching my arty handmade button to the front. And I'm using very strong thread to stitch a couple of strands of that to stitch the button on, because I want that to be strong. Several strands held together, and it's starting to get hard to get through there. So what I will do now is I think we've got enough passes back and forth through. I'll take it down through the button from front to back one more time, and I'm not going to go through the backing button this time. What I'll do this time now is I'm going to take my thread and wrap it once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 or 6 times. Then I'll go through those wraps and stitch through them. Oops, I've caught a bit of backing fabric. That it just adds strength. I'm going to stitch through those at least 5 or 6 times. And sometimes what I'll even do is I'll take my needle through a loop and wrap it around the needle a couple of times and pull that up too. Just adding in extra security so that I'm stitching through those loops just to make that button really want to stay on there. And that is one secure button. Okay, so our button is now firmly stitched on, and what we want to do now is just take our Lucet cord. What I did was I just measured and made sure that the cord is going to be long enough to go over my button. And because the Lucet cord, the wool that I used was kind of springy, it didn't have to be extra long. So you can see it's going to fit just fine. So I will take a tapestry needle, and again I fold my end over and push the fold through the eye of the needle. And now what I'm going to do is take my hands out of the tripod, and I will place 2 pins to show me where I want the ends to be. I want the ends to be kind of close-ish together so that they make they'll make a nice loop that'll hold that button in place, and I'll bring it over, and then I will use the yarn ends to stitch the Lucet cord to the garment, the edge of the garment. You want to leave several inches for stitching at both ends of your cord so that you're not cutting it short. Now I made the Lucet cord contrasting, but you don't have to. You can make it in your, the same color as your garment. Then I'm going to push that end through, take the end now in and weave that end in and fold it, and so I've woven that end in. So I'm going to just trim the end close to the cord. And now I will stitch the second end of the Lucet cord to the, well, we're going to call it the garment edge, but you know what I mean. In this case, it's just a demonstration square, but in real life, you'd be doing this on a garment or bag or some sort of accessory. Curtain tie backs, whatever you like. And quick like a wink, you have got an awesome button closure. Okay. There. The ends have snagged. So now I will use a crochet hook to just weave in those ends. And sometimes when I'm weaving in ends, if they don't want to stay woven in, I will use a felting needle and just chung 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 with the felting needle, and that will make it behave itself quite nicely. So there we have our second button closure. There we go. Whoa, sorry, the tripod keeps collapsing on me. Silly old bear. Okay, that's 2 ways of using Lucet cord as button closures. Now the next one I'm going to show you looks complicated when it's done, but it's really easy to do and quite gorgeous too. The third closure that I'm going to do is a petal style closure, a frog and loop style of closure. So I have a square here that's going to be the representation of our garment and the chain stitch line down the center, which I hope you can see there. That would be the opening of the garment. So half of the closure goes on this side of the garment, half of the closure goes on this side. We're going to start. I have made 2 cords on my Lucet. They're each 13 inches long, or about 13 inches. I'm going to take the ends. Whoops, I just knocked my pincushion over. I bought this pincushion for my mum when I was a wee little girl. Okay, so I'm going to fold the yarn end, push the fold through the eye of the needle. I'm going to go through one of the holes in the button. I'm using a twig button. You could use a bead or a regular button that has holes in it, or even a shank button. Okay, so I'm going to pull my cord through. And pull. Now I'll take my ends out. I'm going to tie the ends together. So I've made a big loop. There we go. So now I can go back, take that, I wanted to be able to tie that in the loop. So I'm going to take that back, and now my ends are at the button, just a little bit out from the button. I'm going to wrap the end around, and I'm going to tie that in a surgeon's knot. So that means I go through once, and I'm going to go through again and pull up. Now I just go through once and pull up. There we go. We'll trim those ends later when we're doing the stitching in. Okay, so I'm going to place my button where I want it on the opening. Remember, this chain stitch is the opening of our garment. So I'm going to now, I'm going to make a loop with a littler loop from the big loop. And then another loop, I just twist the cord. And voila, I have 3 petals, just like that. Isn't that easy? Okay, they look great. So I'm just going to pin them in place, and hopefully I can do it without pinning them to the tablecloth. So pin, pin, pin. There we go. We're halfway there. Well, we'll have to stitch it all down, but you know what I mean when I say we're halfway there. Now, for the other side of the closure, this is the button business end, and we have to have a loop on this side. So we have our second 13-inch cord. Now, I made these 13 inches because that's a size that works with large buttons. If you're using finer thread and smaller buttons, you'll probably want to go with a shorter cord. Using a larger button and heavier cord, you're going to want to go longer. So there, I've tied my ends together, and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to push that button. I'll just put another pin in just to hold everything all together ever so politely. And then just ask it to move itself over here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a loop that will be my button loop. So I'm looking at what would be the perfect size for my button loop. And here comes my beloved husband. Hello, darling. Just making a video. Oh, so the dogs will go mad now. Okay, so I'm using my yarn ends to make the button loop. I'm just going to make the... Hello, darling. I'm making a video. That's okay. And so now we tie that off. Got distracted and I didn't do the surgeon's loop. Oops. Oh, well, that's okay. And I made my ends a little too short. You might want to make your ends a bit longer. Yeah. Okay. So, you know how I laid the other side down next to the, remember this is the opening here, and then I just flipped it to get my 3 petals? Well, that's what I'm going to do here. There we go. We just twist that loop to get the 3 petals. And you've actually got 4 petals because you have the opening of, you have your loop that will go over the button to be the actual business part of the loop. And then we stitch, no, excuse me, we pin that down. So excited to see my husband that I got all flustered and said the wrong thing. Okay, so we'll just pin those little darlings into place. And then the next step is to give your husband a hug. The next step is to then stitch around the edges of the cord, of course leaving your loop open, and stitch around the petals on both sides. So I'm just going to go and do that. Oops, small dog barking. And then our closure will be complete. Pretty cool, hey? It looks so complicated and beautiful, and isn't it easy? So it's easy once you know how. So I'm just going to go get that stitched, and I'll be back and show you how it looks when it's all done. When I'm stitching the cord to the garment, I'm all tangled up here. I have to get untangled. I have too much thread on my needle is why. I always start by securing the point where, that intersection where all of the crissy-crossy stuff happens with the 3 loops. And I come up from behind and I stitch over and pull down. Oops, I have a hitchhiker there. And pull down. And then I simply just, I've done that a couple of times. I have stitched across here and here and here, just because once you've got your intersection secure, then it goes together really quickly and easily. So then I stitch, I'll pull out my pin and simply stitch the cord to the garment, doing a kind of a running catch stitch. And I hold my thumb in the middle of the loop to keep the loop in a really pleasing shape. If it's quite a thick cord that you've made, you'll probably need to stitch both sides of it, like on the outside and possibly on the inside too. You'll just have to be the judge of that. I've got way too much thread in my needle. I got too enthusiastic. Anyhow, that's how you stitch it on. Just stitcheroo, stitch, stitch, stitch. Way too much thread. Okay, I'm going to just finish stitching that on, and then I'll come back and show you how it looks. So there we have it, a petal style, frog style closure, and it works beautifully. Here's our one side of our garment, other side of our garment. Here's the loop and the button, and there you have it. Now, this will work just fine with spool knitted cord. So if you don't have a Lucet but you have a spool knitter, you can easily do this kind of cord closure with spool knitted cord. And I also just need to make a disclaimer here. This is my own, this is the way I've figured out how to do this. And so this works great for me. I'm sure other people have figured out other ways that work great for them. But I'm just sharing with you what I have worked out with using Lucet cord and spool knitted cord for closures. So we have our fancy petals, the one loop and the other loop, and so there you go. 3 ways of using Lucet cord to make wonderful button closures. Be well and enjoy.